Bye. Welcome to Speak with Eve. I'm your host, Eve Eurydice, and today's guest is Alexis Masciarella. Alexis is a second-year law student. She and I have been talking about it, so we want to bring the audience in our conversation. Welcome to the show, Alexis.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it because I think I will learn a lot.
Yes, there's a lot to learn, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am most horrified, if that's the right word, by child sex robots. So I will want to ask you about that at some point. But I think we can just start with an overview of where we are in terms of, sex robots and where the technology is and what's available. So, it's clear. I mean, what I do know is that Europe's first sex robot brothel opened in Barcelona. And that there is a talking sex robot called Harmony. The names are all very interesting, right? That's built in California. So, and also something else that has, strikes me very much is that the people who interact with these robots, and of course the designers, the people who make them, speak of them in terms of gender, right? So it's like a she or a he. It's never an it. They humanize them pretty much instantaneously. So there are already conversations of whether just because a robot is a machine, they shouldn't have to give consent, right? So
yes, it's very interesting, especially just the sex robot alone is going to spark so much conversation between us. But also now that you bring up a sex robot brothel, I mean, that's an entirely different conversation to have.
Not just, let's say, abuse, but mostly alienation, right? Losing even more our facility with the human body, right? With the rites and rituals, the mating rites, right? The ways in which we lovingly, are able to engage with each other's bodies. So, which it seems like the internet has already taken us away from that somewhat, with the dating apps and in a million ways, with the screen that seems to separate us at all times. I mean, we think about each other in terms of visuals, right? Yeah.
Well, I think it's good actually that you brought up Harmony, because Harmony is the sex robot that we actually discussed at length.
Oh, great.
And to give the listeners a little bit more background on Harmony, Harmony goes for about $6,000. You can buy her online. She is designed to fulfill the role of a partner for any kind of intimate interaction, and you can customize her from her eye color, makeup style, hairstyle, breast size, genitalia, piercings, freckles. I mean, you could customize her to a T. And it's very interesting, this sex robot in particular, because she has AI paired with her robotic capabilities so that she's able to actually not only look like a human, but she can display these human-like behaviors so that people can speak to her and she'll respond. And it won't just be like, pulling a string on a toy with a set response. Harmony will actually learn what you like, develop a personality around you that you would find attractive, and she'll create this illusion that you're actually in an emotional relationship with Harmony. And I think the creator of the robot actually said that he wants the user to fall in love with Harmony to the point of wanting to marry her. And I think that's very interesting because they also say using Harmony for only sex is like using your car to only listen to the radio. And that's a great selling point. But I think it also brings up a lot of problems that we might have too with these robots. She's been getting a lot of attention A lot of like the big news sources that do all kinds of like, sex news and news regarding like robot and AI technology usually cite Harmony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems to me that it's something that sex usually moves the rest of technology forward, right? So it seems to me that something that will be developed first, and then it will be followed by robots to do all kinds of things that now only humans can do, because if you actually get to the place of such intimacy with a machine, then there is a lot more intimacy with a machine to be had, in daily life, and a lot less need for intimacy with humans as a result, which to me seems like escapism from like nature and reality. And also it feeds like, transactionalism, it feeds the understanding of interaction as something that money, can buy, that you can purchase, right? And then, it does raise these questions, speaking of like, consent, let's say, or the value of the robot. Can you like have like death fantasy sex, with this machine? Or, all kinds of like stuff that would be unimaginable, or, unimaginably, brutal and illegal with the living human person. Could they be done in the privacy of one's, apartment with these robots? I don't know. There's actually a case. I don't know if you learned about it, of a robot called Samantha, and a sex robot, and I think that she was abused during sex by like a couple who broke her fingers. And whatever, I don't remember exactly what else happened to the machine. But, she was represented as a victim, in the sense like, the way a Me Too woman would be a victim, right? So, and the engineers who took her side basically and wrote about this, I think, we're using the fact that she's in a human form in a very, beautiful, attractive, idealized, right, human kind of like sculpture, using that to project on her like a full-blown humanity, right? Which makes her a better product, because that's what the client wants. The client wants to call her, so more people will buy it if it's not an it, right? So it is interesting. Yeah. What do you think?
This is something we actually talked about at length, which is our human connection to robots before we even got into sex robots. And one thing to think about is people connect to inanimate objects all the time. Like when you're younger and you have that favorite teddy bear, I still have some stuffed animals in my room that I feel attached to from childhood. There's something to be said about humans tend to connect with inanimate objects all the time. But we have a stronger connection to these social robots because, especially when they have like human-like qualities, and when there's a thing called the caregiver effect, which pretty much states that when you nurture a machine that presents itself as dependent, it's going to create a significant social attachment. So there's definitely something to be said about that. And I think you also brought up a very interesting point earlier, and I didn't want to lose it, where you were talking about whether or not you can perform sexual acts on this robot or do anything with this robot in the privacy of your own home. And I think a huge danger in these robots that are paired with AI technology that listens to you and learns how to respond to you. I mean, this robot is essentially collecting your data. It's recording your voice. Where does that information go? Does it stay in the machine? I mean, Harmony is connected to an app on your phone. So that data does not remain in the machine. We already know that it transfers to the app on your phone. How else do we know that it's not going back to the manufacturer? You know, how
Right.
safe are you and how private are your interactions with these sex robots? I think a lot of people overlook the possibility that you could essentially be recorded having sex with these robots, whether it's, vanilla sex or as crazy as you could get. You may be at risk of having your private life exposed.
Right. That's the other side of it. And that's very interesting. And the government, I mean, it would take like one law enacted by Congress, and potentially the government would get access to that information. So yeah, ethically, philosophically, I mean, I think that we still don't have a clean definition of what is sex now that sex is no longer connected to procreation. It's such a novel development in human history, culture, existence, right? So for millions and years, we had sex and we had babies, and one was connected to the other. And then, like, since the 60s, basically, from the invention of like the pill and the paternity test and then IVF and one thing after the other, now surrogacy, we've got to a place where people of means, and this becomes another incentive to make money, right? Which ultimately is what the system wants, is to keep us wanting to make money. But anyway, people with money can, hire a surrogate and hire an egg donor and get the baby they want, in the lab, and show up at the hospital and collect it. And all of it is legal. And so they don't have like the physical, the kind of like inseparable bond that happens between, especially mother and child through like the 10 months that this child is herself, right? And then through like the ring of fire, like, adulthood ritual of like, breaking open into two or more beings, right? So instead, that's like subcontracted by, I guess, poorer women out. And then the buyers, right, of this kind of like birthing, procreative exchange can meanwhile have intimacy with machines. And, the guy who invented or started whatever Ethereum, Bukharin, I think is his name, has proposed, creating artificial wombs or uteruses, supposedly to like, help women, like help women keep jobs, right? Coding and writing code instead of, screaming and feeling like what I think is like the ecstasy of birth. Yeah. Okay, great. How egalitarian. Make sure women can only do what men can do. But in any case, it is, it is a strange moment because we're so close to it, and the language that the machine makers use is very, very smart, right? Mm-hmm. So they present this sex bot, all the different sex bots are presented as therapeutic, mostly, right? And the idea is that they create harm limitation, so that instead of potential harms that could be caused to women or children or sex workers or whatever, targeted in some form of violence or sexual frustration, instead the robotic models like take the brunt, right? And and or the excess, if there is excess of whatever sexual need. And also, if when men who have sexual difficulties with all kinds of things, whatever it is, ejaculation, premature, this, that, whatever it is, the claim is also that these robots help them, right? Because they don't have the fear of performing, and there are all kinds of like, I guess, instructions that are given by the companies that sell them, to help them use them as, as like a sex therapy tool.
I think what's problematic about use of sex robots is the inherent nature of human and robot sex is sex with a thing that lacks any subjectivity, they lack any kind of autonomy, yet they're purposefully made to represent a person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you pretty much boil down these sex robots to instruments and tools, but then continue to refer to Harmony as a her and like humanize this thing, as you stated earlier, I feel like respect for humanity is just like completely violated. Because now you have this thing that's viewed as a person, but it's instead used as a tool for their own selfish purposes, whether, you know, they just want to get off or they want to practice and be better. Instead of respecting something that is humanized, I just think that's a complete violation of humanity. I mean, you also brought up the straining of human relationships through, the sale of these sex robots. I mean, there are definitely benefits or, arguments that these robots can be beneficial. But let's just think about the audience itself who's going to be purchasing these robots. I think Harmony found in their data that the vast majority of their buyers are heterosexual males. And this is just their ability to personalize and customize Harmony is just further objectification of the female body. And it continues to create these negative body images for real women. And when you're a sex robot, I mean, no woman can compete with a robot. I mean, women's bodies change over time. You can't turn us on and off, like with the flick of a switch. I mean, it's the same argument against pornography, except in this case, I would argue that it's even worse because pornography is not a substitute for a real woman, but these dolls, these robots are introduced as substitutes for women. And like you said in the beginning, this is going to create more alienation and more intimidation between men and women.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, first of all, we can see that because we have the evidence from online porn, right? So there are no studies that I know of, and I try to find them. There are no convincing studies yet done, about the efficacy of sex robots. But there are studies that have shown that since the kind of explosion in use of online porn sites, there has been a similar explosion in sexual violence and paraphilia, right? So sexual deviance, let's say, and I think that part of it is that the viewers who start super young, they're if you're a preteen and a teen, that's where you're going to go look, right? It's something that's not discussed. It's the only place you can find, and you can get it on your phone, right there in bed at night, right? So, this is like a million years away from like our parents or grandparents' generation, where it was just like the Playboy magazine. But I think that already, like, porn and also like sites like, OnlyFans, created this kind of pornification and dehumanization, of sexuality. Because the users and the buyers and the clients are mostly male, the sellers and the objects, the self-objectifying sellers are women, and women are encouraged to copy what they see, what the men have seen on the screen. That's what the men want them to do. And the men will usually pay them in one way or another, whether it is with like a ton of attention and love and gifts and time, or, you know, with actual money, or with, you know, perks and breaks and favors and, or whatever it is, you know, that transactionality, which I think is really corrupt. And I think it's the main corruption in the heart of the patriarchic system continues. It just goes on and on. It's a way for the system to sustain itself, even though everything, you know, the rules no longer apply. Like, there is no patriarchy in reality, right? We no longer need to domesticate and, you know, like lock up women for the duration of their procreative years, you know, from like the start of reproductive age to its end, the way that, you know, our ancestors did, to make sure that like the one man, one womb, like rule, you know, can be applied to, you know, to make sure that like every man has a womb of his own, right? Because men are not born with one, and they had to kind of, you know, get one attached to them artificially through the patriarchy. Okay, so all of those conditions have ended, like, as we said, you know, since the, you know, end of World War II, basically, slowly. They've ended. You know, by now, in this century, they no longer exist at all. That's why we have serial marriages, and monogamy has become like monogamish, and everyone or everywhere around is kind of like, you know, searching sexually and emotionally and romantically and all of that, right? So, but the system of like non-procreators controlling procreators, you know, and I'm going to say inseminators controlling the breeders, the people who actually are the procreators, who do all of the work of it. That system gets perpetuated through technology now. So the internet, you know, internet porn is one way to perpetuate this extreme, you know, inequality and injustice, I think. And now AI and robots is another way, right? So it's pushing us further and further in that direction, where the non-procreators who make money control those, you know, who make babies, and therefore don't have as much, you know, time or focus or whatever to make money. And it's always on behalf of culture against nature, you know, to put it in very, very general terms. You know what I mean? In very general terms, yeah. So in that big picture of, you know, what feminists, you know, have tried to gain for women, this conversation of you know, robot sex, or all kinds of other, you know, virtual sex, you know, matters, because it's in real time changing our understanding of what intimacy and sexuality, you know, can be. And so it puts, I think, women again in a weaker position, you know, in that whole pyramid.
Definitely. I just, you know, when I was reading a lot of the notes and journals that people involved in robotics have, you know, extensively studied about robots and the ethics and morality, there are, you know, some benefits that they line out, kind of like what we talked about earlier with, oh, well, it could be a form of practice. But, you know, I can only imagine if a young man who has not lost his virginity yet buys one of these sex robots in the hopes that it will recreate the experience of him losing his virginity, I think that's a complete misrepresentation, because these sex robots are specifically designed to please the male user. You know, whatever they do to the sex robot is going to, you know, feel so good. And, you know, they're going to get all the responses that they would like. I haven't seen a sex robot on the market that's supposed to, you know, show otherwise. And if a young man is depending on this sex robot to increase his sexual skill, I'm not sure that's what he's going to get when he actually has sex with a real woman. And it could honestly be scarring for the both of them.
Yeah.
Where the young woman is in pain, she feels uncomfortable, and then you have the young man utterly confused, probably a little embarrassed and traumatized, because here he goes in thinking that he's going to be the best of the best, and then you're involved with a real woman who has real feelings and emotions, and things are going to hurt, that wouldn't hurt a sex robot with no feelings. And I think that creates something really traumatic for both people involved.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
But there also are the one benefit to sex robots that I could understand is that some people simply are robot fetishists, and they just like the idea of having sex with a robot. And I honestly can't find anything really harmful about that.
Oh, yeah, me too. I mean, 100%. But that, for now at least, and until we get populated by, and learn to coexist with robots. For now, that's like a tiny minority. So that's not really an ethical issue. It's such a small number, right? So, I think that the bigger questions are similar to computer generated child pornography, right? Well, it's computer generated. Real children don't suffer, but it still has a negative impact on our moral character and our habits, and it undermines our respect for each other, right? So we agree on that. And what's the difference between that and the robots, the sex robots? So and then the question becomes, is it appropriate to sell sex toys, to all and sundry? Is it conceivable, for example, that someone, let's segue to child sex robots, right? Child sex robots are defined as robots designed to look and act like a child. Now, the laws treat child sex robots as sex toys, right? So let us say that someone buys a child sex robot for the same reason that people buy sex toys mostly, which is curiosity. You want to do something different. You go into the sex shop, but this is, I guess, an online expensive sex shop, and you want to try something out, right? So that is not necessarily a pedophiliac. That is not a person attracted to minors or perhaps who has ever thought it until they see this, image, right? And get an inkling to try it out. So, is it possible that we're manufacturing sex perversion, perverts, basically? Is it possible? Is it conceivable that someone buys this toy out of curiosity, and in the process of using it, likes it, becomes obsessed with it, and then grows into, becomes a pedophiliac, right? So, to me, that's conceivable.
I definitely agree. I think that a desire to be sexual with a child or anything childlike is a very misguided and immoral desire. And I just don't see, because many make the argument of, these childlike sex robots, they can be used in the treatment of pedophilia, or maybe just, pure fantasy. But just like, we see in porn, as porn becomes more violent towards women, that men are, starting to replicate those actions on their real life partners. I don't see how that wouldn't occur also with a user of a child sex robot.
Right. It's like the gateway, the gateway drug, right? So in terms of consequentialist reasoning, the child robots could lead to something, worse. You see what I mean? The consequence, where you start with the sex robot that looks like a child, and you end up with, and the idea is that, it can help or treat people with pedophilic predilections. And, what happens to the people who don't have pedophilic predilections, who try it out, and then they do end up with pedophilic predilections because they like it. Because there is something about the defenseless kind of like sweetness and powerlessness of children that clearly attracts, all kinds of men who will not act on it. And we know that from the prevalence of porn, of child pornography online, right? Which is much more. I mean, many, many more people are curious, have been caught because they're curious to watch that than people have been, caught who actually have preyed on minors, right? And there is also some argument out there, but, the research is very unclear that there is already a more prevalent tendency for, pedophilic interests than there was before. This type of child porn became readily available where people could download like thousands of images. So, nevertheless, there is no established rule that bans the purchase or sale, of any of these, right, or importation of any of these sex dolls, including, child sex dolls. Even though there are very strict rules about, child pornography, of course, because it's thought to encourage offenses against children in the real world. So what do you guys discuss, or what do you think about the law in this place? Is it appropriate for the law to restrict somewhat, or there's no room for that, really?
Personally, I hold the view that I think that child sex robots should be banned, because I think it's also important for the listeners to understand that, these aren't just, children, they're robots. These are toddlers. These are babies. These robots, some of them are programmed to respond to the sexual act and say, no, please don't. They're programmed to cry. I mean, you have the same case in the sex robots who are programmed for cases of rape fantasy, where you have, adult female robots that are programmed to cry and say no. But it only becomes arguably more egregious when you have a child, a toddler, or a baby sex robot. I really, my own morals can't justify the purchase of a child sex robot. I feel like there's this innate part of humanity, maybe it's just women, but I feel like I hope that it's humanity. When you see something that's tragic about to happen, to a child, I feel like you almost have this innate response to, go and protect that child, or, leap out in front of that car, push, something out of the way to protect that child at all costs, even if it isn't your own. I mean, we see babies as these really innocent, beautiful creatures. There's something in my morals that I would really like to see a ban of these. Mm-hmm. However, when I express this view in my class, my professor, he tends to like to play the devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. And he said, these are objects made by a manufacturer. In order to get Congress or, any kind of our legislators involved, you better have some data that, backs your position up. And mm-hmm. he told the class that there's currently no data that shows that child sex robots, or these robots that are programmed to, recreate a rape fantasy, no data shows that they are harmful or that they encourage this kind of fantasy. Mm-hmm. So there's little to be offered and little to be done right now. Maybe there will be as these robots become more accessible to others and they become more affordable. But I do think, I really do think it's a major concern, and I'd like to see something be done before it gets to the point where something has to be done.
Yeah. Well, it's just like, women who call on their boyfriends or husbands or exes, and nothing can be done until he actually hurts her. It's kind of like that. Someone who has one of these has to hurt an actual person in a very similar way or in the exact same way. And even then, it will take a talented lawyer to make that stick, the first time. But there is something, I agree. I mean, I'm not, I'm not a libertarian, but I'm not paternalistic at all. I don't like government to tell me what to do at all. But I do think that there is something, there is an issue of like legal moralism, which is, legal moralism is like how, it's the law prohibits desecrating corpses, right? So corpses are also like inanimate, right? So there is no actual harm to others, right? But there is a symbolic harm, which is why we restrict those acts, because they offend us symbolically, because this, this body like has been human, right? So it's not quite the same category, but it's an example where, there is a moral issue that, has been translated into law without actual, criminality being proven. And I think that, the child sex bots, can be justified in a similar way, that they are, even if they don't harm anyone, they're just offensive, and what do you do if like someone is a father and has a young kid and also has that thing at home, or someone is a teacher of young kids and has that robot at home? And how far are we going, are we going to like trust the human mind to make that, dualistic difference between thing and human when they talk of those things, when they give those things names and personalities and voices and genders, right? So either keep it looking like, strange, inhuman, non-human, and not humanize it, or don't kid us and tell us that, this is a machine when it suits you, and then it's like Samantha, whose feelings are hurt and who got a boo-boo. Roboticists, are arguing that all these sex bots serve a greater good and they're socially beneficial, and it's like, giving methadone to a heroin addict, and and then they say, we have to test this hypothesis before we take any action. But it is very difficult to be tested because these are, private. This is, the law, privacy, the right to privacy kicks in, right? So who is investigating unless people volunteer? And then that cannot be quite trusted.
No, and I think you're also getting at kind of like this overarching theme of our conversation, which is really just very simply put, respect for humanity. Mm-hmm. And, I was a religion major in undergrad, and we talked a lot about some of the Confucian principles that pretty much, still reign in just our morals and values we're taught when we're very young. And one of those things is, humanity and living creatures should be above all. We should respect humanity and all living things above all. And mm-hmm. when you have something as complex as a robot coupled with AI technology, and, you make them look human, they feel human, they talk to you, you develop this relationship with them, especially in the case of something as like intimate as like the experience of sex. I mean, that is, the utmost disrespect to humanity, because you're going to be exhibiting behavior to these robots that is just going to desensitize you. I mean, I think of it, even though there's not a lot of data regarding these sex robots, just think about, a lot of people talk about, video games and violence, and how, video games lead to desensitization. Mm-hmm. Or, if you abuse your dog, you're more likely to abuse your child and your wife. Mm-hmm. These are all things that studies have shown are frequently linked. So I don't think it's much of a logical jump to think that abusing a robot that is created to be mm-hmm. as close to human as mm-hmm. possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is just, I think it's a gateway to all the wrong things.
Right. It kind of like, it weakens our empathy, right? Like it makes us, we can, the people who, engage in this, especially regularly, undergo like an emotional hardening, I imagine, right? So they can become more callous toward human suffering because they've been practicing on like mock humans. And so they are more likely, if you get used to indulging, your darkest fantasies and desires in virtual world, and then you can do it maybe in some form of meta, and then you can also have the robot, interaction, and, these robots, then give you like the tactile part of what, the emotional and the psychological, replication is virtually, in these games and whatever. Then overall, it seems to me, we are evolving toward away from empathy, and toward some sort of like sclerotic, sclerosis, basically, of the things that you say are, define our humanity, And what's interesting here is that it's these things, these aspects of us that AI can never replicate, right? Like, it's our faith in God, our awe in nature, our the sense, the way that we can be transported outside of ourselves, through some sort of like immersion in our natural senses. These Definitely. Are the things that we can hardly put in words. I mean, you can hear how I have to stop and try not to speak in metaphor is difficult. But they are real, and they define us as humans, and they cannot be replicated. So, this process of let's say hardening is kind of like evolving us away from those, and those are our primal instincts, right? Our primal instincts are not simply that we want to like, hunt and gather and mate and eat and drink. Our primal instincts are like, I think, a plethora of languages that we inherited, from our ancestors who lived for millions and millions of years before, we became conscious, right? I mean, consciousness is only like maybe 4,000 to 6,000 years old. It's very young. So all these, eons before, we communicated, with messages and feelings and sounds and body language and senses, right? That's all in us already. And it's becoming weaker and weaker because we're emphasizing language so much, especially now with the internet, where everything, seems to be written around us. But the things that we're discussing now are taking us way further in that direction, which I don't think it's a direction that supports the survival of the species, right?
Definitely not. I mean, I think I think that the way that we use technology and the way that we create and use robots is really going to be a reflection on our own morality. And, for years, for centuries, for decades, for as long as, our humanity has become civilized, there are certain things that we do just out of morality. Like the passing of legislation, barring the desecration of a corpse, or, there's a lot of people who are, want to prevent cruelty to animals, which is different because, they're also living things, but there are species that, we tend to have still some disconnect and we don't really understand them fully. But there's parts of us that recognizes that, we want to prevent cruelty to animals.
Oh, 100%.
And when you think about that, that really reflects on us. And it kind of goes into this bigger question on, how should robots be treated? How is that going to reflect on us? And it's not limited to these sex robots, but, even if you just had, one of those servant robots that you see in the movie that bring you your coffee in the morning and clean up after you. I mean, are we going to treat those robots as if they are slaves? These are all dangerous ideas that we need to consider, because I think that when we do have social robots enter our lives, we do have to treat them with some level of respect, as you would for property. But I think it's a very fine balance, because you don't want to be desensitized, but you also don't want to strain human relationships more than they already have been by technology.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Did you? I don't know if I told you this, but I don't know if you watched him, but there was this engineer in Google who actually broke the secrecy and came out,
watched it.
Right? That robots have consciousness.
Yep, Google developed an AI, according to this whistleblower, that they created an AI that is sentient.
Exactly, that's what the word he used, and he also called the robot by a human name, and said it's a person. I forget if it was a he or a she. I would call it an it, but the Google engineer said she's a person because she's sentient. But the example he gave was that he asked the robot, if I do this for you, what would you do? No, would you do this for humans if they asked? And the robot said, I wouldn't, unless there was something in it for me. Why would I do what I'm told if there's nothing in it for me? And that was how the engineer realized, oh wait, this robot has a sense of self, right? Sentient. But
no, that was I watched a podcast where the whistleblower was interviewed, and I think he said something that was very interesting that kind of connects to our conversation. Is after he figured out that this AI was sentient, he asked the AI, how would you like me, to regard you? What do you prefer when I, perform these studies on you and run data tests? And one of the things that the AI requested was, please ask for my consent before you perform any test. Yeah. Please ask for my consent before you do anything.
Wow.
And I think that goes back to these robots. I mean, are we going to start implementing AI that is so advanced that it prefers consent?
Yeah. And then, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think of the war of, humans against robots. That's the next thing. Wait, if they're no longer doing what people tell them to do, people who purchase them, for the express reason of having them do things for them, and what's the, what happens, like the rebellion of the robots. If we're not...
and that's why I was saying, I think that as humans, we need to figure out what that line is, where we're going to be treating these robots with some level of respect, but not enough respect where we get confused for our connection between the robot and ourselves as one with humans. And I think that's going to be the key, because, these robots are entering our lives in various different ways. I mean, it's not limited to sex. There are different service robots. We have robots in manufacturing. We have robots for all different purposes. And, before you know it, we're going to become as dependent as we are on a robot as we are our phones. Yeah. So we need to figure this out now. And I'm not sure if lawmakers should be getting involved. They probably should to some extent. But, then it raises the question, will the government be using data collected by these robots, or will manufacturers, or who is going to be using this data? And I mean, data is, that's a whole other podcast episode that we can go on about. But, these are all valid concerns. And I think some of the roboticists that are, researching and doing writing are definitely doing some of their due diligence. But it would be great to see some lawmakers up there, making an argument on, behalf of our legislators.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a very, the very start of this is how far do we want to allow, robots to become, virtually indistinguishable from humans, right? Like, what is the positive effect from making these robots look like beautiful humans instead of alien objects that perform the same tasks but don't look like anything humanizable, right? So I think that's that's where I would begin. And
I think I know the answer to that, because these manufacturers know that through data, the more human a robot looks like, the more you're going to connect with that robot and the more you're going to trust that robot. And I do think that these manufacturers who are collecting data, I mean, let's think about what are one of the main reasons that, Google and all these different companies want to collect our data. It's so that they can use it for, targeted advertising. And I think that, there's going to be this, major increase of people purchasing these robots. And then all of a sudden, they're going to be getting this like subliminal messaging, subliminal advertising. At the end of the day, manufacturers are going to make the most money off of that human connection.
Yeah. I mean, I personally am against all of it. I find all these sex dolls as a feminist, I just find them offensive. I look at one and my stomach turns, right? So, I mean, I have thought about the history of art, from the beginning of time on like prehistoric caves, to like the earliest idols and the earliest, frescoes, to all through like the history of painting, how in its core, it's just about the representation of like the fertile, feminine, the mystery of what woman is, which is really the mystery of nature, the mystery of procreation. And it just seems that there was already something, deeply deeply objectifying and almost like self-exiling for us as women, because we are part of that culture and we use, we see things through that culture and we speak the language of the culture. So we inevitably adopt this kind of like this, adopt this enforced distance from ourselves, from our embodied selves. We see ourselves as if we're looking from the, through the male gaze at ourselves. But then, when you see these objects that are indistinguishable, it just, makes me worry for the future of, human sexuality, for sure. But also, human relations, maybe, and human, as we're talking now, human ethics, right? It is definitely an ethical dilemma that, that will have to be, untangled or somewhat, enforced. Something's going to have to happen. So if someone cannot come up with a persuasive answer, then I think that it will be good to ask our representatives to act for now before it's too late and we're overtaken by all of these, practices and not cross species, but, machine and human, like crazy interactions, right? Which to me, like, feel like insanity. Like, that's one of the places where, mass madness can begin, when we stop knowing, like, who is human and who is not.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even when you just think of, the lack of legislation when it comes to pornography and how, pornography arguably has been a net negative for humanity and, people. And, maybe some of that could have been prevented, whether it's, the lack of legislation of, actors in pornography, the kinds of pornography that's available, how easily accessible it is. Like you brought up, anybody can stumble across pornography. Very young children can stumble across it on accident. I mean, it's that accessible. Mm-hmm. So it almost leads me to think, legislators and lawmakers should learn from this. And, a lot of conservative lawmakers seem to have, special interest in what they deem as sexually immoral. And I'm surprised that I haven't heard from any, conservative politicians about this, because this seems to be of something they would directly be concerned about.
Yeah. Well, they haven't been able to do anything about big tech anyway. So this is part of that whole world. And it depends, Citizens United is there. So it's really hard to fight against big money without like an outrage, without people, taking to the streets basically and demanding something, Mm-hmm. But it's here. I think the future is now. As they used to say in the 60s, the future is now again. Yeah, and we got to think about our relationship to all the machines that surround us. What if they were all humanized? What would be happening to us?
I don't think we'd leave our homes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that, that means that, like, we each have to buy everything, have a separate home, everybody have all the things, we can't share. There is like no share economy, right? So, you gotta consume even more. So you lose yourself in like the mania of consumption. Yeah, you live to purchase.
It's a manufacturer's dream.
Yeah, it's not pretty. But, I strongly believe that nature will win, it will prevail in the end, and that the people of nature, the naturalists, will be there and, will survive. And the people who go too deeply into this, like, monoculture and digital culture will just not have the skills. Then they, to survive like a climate crisis or whatever, they will not know what to do. And, their nature can create circumstances where your money will not be of use to you, right? So she has that power.
No, I agree. I'm not too worried about the robot revolution, as, I know a lot of people are, because at the end of the day, at least my understanding of robotics is that, we can get extremely close, but it will never be the human experience. And that's why we're alive. That's what we're naturally attracted to. I mean, we were just discussing about how, one of our major concerns of, childlike sex robots and, robots that are made to create rape fantasies is that they are going to one day, not be enough. And then they recreate that on a real living person. And, that extremely, negative case scenario, I think also applies to other things. You may have a social robot in your house that you talk to every day and you have conversation with, but it's not going to, elicit the same emotional feelings of friendship or companionship that you're going to have with a real person. So I do think I agree with you. I think nature will ultimately win. I think the main concern is, human laziness and human dependence. So I hope that us as humans don't get too lazy or dependent on technology, because I think the human experience and our relationships with other people is arguably the most important part of life.
Yeah. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming, Alexis. Beautiful closing. And everyone out there,
thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. And until next week, keep speaking humanity. Love you. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.